Of course, he talked about the choice of hope over fear, and that largely was the election. I'll get into great detail about what the media thought this election was about, what the media thought was happening in the final days of this election. But the Queensland voters, when they voted and how they voted, has told us what this election clearly was about. Now, there essentially was two tracks here. People who voted on the day, people who voted early. The people who voted early, well, they, of course, turned around and delivered an absolute thumper here. Now, the reason why, when we were in that room last night on the LNP and sort of the first hour, okay, maybe they're just getting started. The second hour, what's really going on? The third hour, okay, surely it's known by now. Well, that's because the extreme majority of the vote happened before election day. And the way that I understand the Queensland Electoral Commission did its counting was that it counted out the election day, because all of that was in one box. And after they had done that, that's when they turned to the way bigger box, which had been the early vote. Now, the Queensland Electoral Commission has to change. They either need more people or they need new leadership, because this is not the first time there's been a problem. And when I say problem, I mean delay or lack of information. There were some seats that weren't getting updated for a couple of hours. And that meant that that couple of hour window was an opportunity for the Labor Party and its spinners to pretend that somehow, magically, they had held on to government despite losing up to maybe 15 seats.
It was neck and neck, and Labor did put up a fight, and credit where credit's due. There are certainly a lot of Labor commentators today that say that Stephen Miles, as the Premier, did a fantastic job to try and resurrect Labor's campaign.
For Labor to record the number of seats that we did was a pretty amazing result.
This is rubbish, okay? The only expectation that the polls gave us a couple of weeks out from the election was 55-45. Currently, the number? Well, 49 and a bit for the Labor Party, 54 and a bit for the Liberal Party, okay? So what, 1 point off? That's still absolutely decisive. That is not close. That is not a better campaign. That is not, oh, ifs and buts, and if the campaign went 1 week longer, we would have won. Have a look at the primary vote. Labor went down 6.8%, the LNP went up by 6 points, which meant people went from the Team Red side of the road and they walked straight across to the LNP. The minor party vote, which I'll explain in greater detail a little bit later, well, it didn't appear. I also think people are getting a bit too excited about pretending that the Greens are dead all across Queensland. That's not true. But how can I not talk about Giggles Miles, the former Premier of Queensland? Doesn't that feel good to say? The former Premier of Queensland. Now, he didn't come out and give a speech when it had become clear that not only had he lost government, but the LNP was going to get a majority. Instead, he was making the most of this awkward moment in the counting. Remember, the results aren't changed. The counting of them was the moment for him to be able to walk out there and pretend that somehow he had had a triumph. I have never seen a person who has been swept from government. Remember, they lost 13 seats. They could end up losing 15. Gone, swept. Domestos has been applied. Stain has been removed. Yet because the Labor Party lives in this sort of fake world where when they lose, they were cheated out of it. When they win, it's a revolution for the ages, that this bloke, who is a hyper-partisan, used the moment when, post-election, you've got to let the air out of the balloon. It's how we don't end up as wildly riled up as places like the United States. When elections are very close and there's a couple of seats in it and there'll be a negotiation for who's going to make the government, well, I understand why people give speeches to say they're still in with a shot. But the bloke was rejected. He was rejected as not the preferred Premier. He was rejected as not the man with the answers for Queensland. He was rejected for the laughing about youth crime. He was rejected for trying to buy off an electorate. That even if they liked some of the buy-offs, they took the money and said, now you go and run away. Unlike the KFC ad of what, shut up and take my money, it was, I'll take your money, now you shut up. But Stephen Miles hyper-partisan to the end, was talking not to the people of Queensland, but to the people in the room. This was an opportunity when hundreds of thousands of people were watching across all the different television networks. They were going to read all the coverage in the Courier Mail the next day. And this was a moment where, theoretically, he would be able to begin the rebuild. But I think he did himself about as much damage as Paul Keating did after the 1993 election, when instantly Australians went, I'm not interested in you. And they waited for 3 years and they got rid of him. In this case, he's going to have to work very hard to come back from this as a way of presenting himself when he lost last night.
Watching the results tonight, it is clear that that hasn't been enough to secure a majority of seats for Labor, and also that the LNP is unlikely to have a majority. Queenslanders know what I believe and what I stand for. While David Crisafulli ducked and weaved and tied himself into the tiniest small target Queensland has ever seen. Never before has a party taken to an election with so little detail of their agenda. This election finishes with many more questions about the LNP's plans than answers.
Rubbish, right? He was arrogant. He was rude. He was impolite, all the rest of those things, right? But basically, it was confirmed in the speech what you and I have known all the way through the election and all the way through his premiership. That while many of his media mates here in Queensland and around the country desperately hoping that he would be able to find a way to bribe or BS the people of Queensland, we saw the real Stephen Miles. We saw through the campaign garbage. We saw through the giggles. We saw through the buy-offs. And the reality was that the nasty bloke who, when the mask came off, showed himself to be that nasty bloke on election night is the bloke who we all know would behave like that behind the scenes, brutally. It'll be a long road back for the Labor Party. But in a state where they have been in government for much of the past 30 years, with one term exception, they've got plenty of mates in the public service that will leak to them. They've got plenty of mates in the unions that went silent about hospitals and crime that are now going to scandalise every single case to make it look like the new government is more chaotic than the one that has been removed. But I want to show you two examples of the type of Labor Party that even people who don't vote for the Labor Party but remember a better Labor Party don't associate with the current Labor Party. Murray Watt is, again, a hyper-partisan who was on television today. And if you can't say we lost at the end of the game, then people know you're not telling the truth. You can say you're disappointed. You can say that people got it wrong if that's your belief. But this was the reaction of Senator Murray Watt today, justifying the behaviour of Miles last night.
I actually thought Stephen's speech was terrific. I thought he talked about the great effort from Labor and its volunteers, acknowledged what Queenslanders had had to say through their voting patterns. I think, to be fair to Stephen, at the time that he gave that speech last night, the result was pretty unclear. The LNP hadn't reached a majority at that point in time.
No. There's no do-overs. There's no do-overs. If the result was unclear, then you wait until the result is clear. Instead, he waited long enough for the narrative to go out long enough, so on some bizarre, passive-aggressive level, he could deny, yes, the hyper-partisans, but the people who wanted the result to be a change of government, to make it seem like there hadn't been a tectonic shift in state politics that will not last forever, only, of course, registered in 4-year increments. But something big changed in Queensland. Now compare Stephen Miles and Murray Watt with our mate Richo. He wouldn't defend this crap last night, and that's old school Labor. The people who say the people always get it right, even when you lose.
As graceless as it was pathetic. I'm not going to defend that. That was a load of crap, and I'm very disappointed. That was a bullfheaded performance.
Good on him. If you watched our coverage last night, you heard me say particularly warm things to Richo after he said that. I repeat them again here. That is how Australians play their politics. You can be frustrated, you can be heartbroken, but the sun comes up the next day. And while certain decisions and certain personalities may not please you, at the end of the day, at the end of the game, at the end of the fight, there has to be a genuine spirit of recognising what happened, that you won and that you lost. You should be a good winner and not rub people's faces in it. And you should be a good loser and recognise that you have lost, that you got it wrong. Thank goodness we have Richo on nights like last night.